Good morning to everyone once again. On behalf of the United States Postal Service, I want to welcome the family of James Robinson Jr., as well as all of you to today's dedication ceremony. My name is Shanita Robinson. I am the proud postmaster of the city of Westmont. As well, I am honored to welcome each of you to this historic event. It is particularly fitting today that we gather here to dedicate the Westmont Post Office building in honor of the life and legacy of James Robinson, as today is his day of birth. This is the very neighborhood that James was raised and born in. By dedicating this building, we pay tribute to Mr. Robinson and all of the public servants who make significant contributions to our country. Again, you guys are welcome here today. Thank you for coming out to participate in this ceremony. And at this time, I will call up Mr. Harold Burke, as he will be our master of ceremony.
Thank you very much, and welcome. We have a beautiful day to pay tribute to a fallen hero. I'd like to just briefly tell you how this day came about. 3 years ago, I received a phone call from a very good friend of mine, Frank Trout, the commander of the American Legion Westmont post here, 338. And Frank said to me, "Would you believe there's a young man buried at the Clarendon Hills Cemetery who was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously during Vietnam War, and there is no memorial to him?" And in the course of our conversation, he mentioned to me, and credit must go to Fred Buddinger. Fred was the former superintendent of the school district here, and Fred had written a story about the education system here in Westmont and how it started. And as part of his story, called Westmont Stories, he included the story about James Robinson, and he called attention to the fact that although James Robinson's family lived here in Westmont, the grandfather was 5-term mayor of Westmont, there was no memorial to him. Well, we got together and decided, well, what are we going to do about this? And I proposed having the post office renamed in honor to our fallen hero, Medal of Honor recipient James Robinson. And along the journey, it was like a piece of a puzzle where every piece came together. It was almost like a mosaic when we finished, because a lot of people contributed to it. But as I said earlier, it all started with Fred Buddinger writing that story and calling our attention to the fact that James Robinson was not honored with a memorial. His family had moved to Lyons. A school was named for him in Lyons. He went to Morton High School. I should add that I've lived here in Westmont for 25 years. I didn't know about James. And growing up in Cicero, I found out that James had attended Morton High School. So there was really a very close parallel story to my own, because I was born in 1943. James was born in 1940, and when I read about him, I said, this is the kind of guy I'd like to have a beer and a hamburger with. He was just an amazing young man that went into the Marine Corps, served 3 years honorably, and then joined the Army and went to Vietnam. I'm sorry that his younger brother, Tom, cannot be with us today. He lives in Las Vegas and was unable to join us, but I know he's with us in spirit, and I'm so thankful to the people who made the journey here, all of you, as well as Phil Hall, who's sitting in the front row, who served with James in Vietnam and was with him the day he was killed in action. Also, Ken Mize, who is also here. Ken came from Arkansas, drove here to participate in this tribute. Phil came from Wisconsin. And in closing my remarks, I'd like to say that in a matter of about 2 months, there will be a movie coming out called The Last Full Measure. Phil has been a technical advisor to it. It's a story of a young man named William Pitzenbarger, who was there that day and awarded the Medal of Honor during that same battle where James was killed in action. So I'll now ask Frank Trout, my good friend, and who got this story rolling, to join me here. Frank, as I mentioned, is the commander of the Westmont American Legion and a good friend. And I'm going to ask Frank to do the honors for the prayer and the posting of the colors.
Thank you. Each in his own way, uncover. Heavenly Father, we are here today under your guiding hand. Thank you for watching over us as a people and as a nation. Bring us together as your loving children. Help us to remember Jim and all he has done and what he stands for. Help us to always remember that you are our guiding hand. Through Christ we pray. Amen. Read cover. Now I'd like to have members of the Honor Guard present our colors. Please all stand. Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, Frank. It's my honor at this time. We have special guest here today, and I'd like to invite Congressman John Caston up to say a few words, please. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. It is truly an honor to be here and an honor to be, as we lose our wind, among all the veterans and the hats out here I see today. One of the real sort of privileges of this job that I recently have found myself in is every month or so there's an honor flight group that comes in. And I don't know how many of you have done that program, but just a chance for us to show our respect for our veterans. And I try to get out every time there's a Chicago group, and they've recently expanded the eligibility to include Vietnam veterans. And it is noticeable how many times when I come out there, you see these men with tears in their eyes saying, when I came home, I was spit on, and for the first time I'm being respected and treated with dignity. And I don't want to diminish all the other veterans in the room, but it is truly a privilege to be here and recognizing some, like my father is a Vietnam veteran who served with dignity and bravery and courage, and do some small thing to remember them. We're here, of course, today to talk about the memory and sacrifice of Sergeant James Robinson. I want to thank Sergeant Robinson's family for being here today, as well as Lieutenant General Rigby. Sergeant Robinson, as I think was discussed earlier, was a native of Hinsdale, and put his life on the line when he made the ultimate sacrifice on April 11th, 1966, with bravery, leadership, and a deep commitment to his duty. Was killed while protecting his fellow soldiers from enemy snipers. His courageous and self-sacrificing actions saved his brothers in uniform and rightfully earned him a posthumous Medal of Honor, serving as an inspiration to the rest of us. What we do in our own lines of work, it's hard to even fathom what he did in that time of need. And so we thank him, we recognize him. Today we honor his life, his legacy, by designating the Westmont Post Office as the James William Robinson Jr. Memorial Post Office, so that future generations will hopefully take some time to walk by, look at the name, do some research as you did, Hal, and learn a little bit about the history of one of our more distinguished fellow neighbors. I also really want to take a moment to thank my predecessor. I came into office here with all the good work that Hal did, with Congressman Roscom, who preceded me, got this bill done in the 115th Congress. And while Peter Roscom isn't here today, let's all remember the hard work he did to make this happen, because we wouldn't be here unless he had done that as well. So thank you again to all who have come out today, and hope we can live up to some small fraction of the bravery and courage that Sergeant Robinson did. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Congressman. Congressman mentioned something that I want to pay honor to three individuals here, and there's maybe more in the audience, and I don't mean to overlook any other World War II veterans, but I'd like to call your attention to the front row. To my right, in the front row, there are three World War II veterans that have joined us today. And if there's any other World War II veterans, please raise your hand. Thank you, sir. We have Marcel Levesque, U.S. Navy. Dr. Floyd Meisner, U.S. Marine Corps. Semper Fi. And next to him is his high school classmate, John Garnaccia, U.S. Army, World War II. And I know we have some other ones in the audience. They've been my inspiration as well. Right now I'd like to also introduce, we have the honor of having State Representative Deanne Muscati. Is that right? Close enough? Okay. At this time, I'd like to invite Mayor Ron Gunther from the village of Westmont to step up and say a few words. I'd like to mention that Mayor Gunther was wonderful, and his staff, I'd like to compliment. We had a dedication, well, starting in April of 2018, we had a memorial at James Robinson's grave. and at Clarendon Hill Cemetery. And Mayor Gunther was kind enough to come to that memorial, and I like to think help start what we see today. And also, last Veterans Day, we unveiled a plaque that was donated by New York artist Scott Teller, black granite plaque, tribute to James Robinson. And the plaque is the same black granite material that's used on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., and it's diamond etched. So anybody who has an opportunity to visit the Village Hall in the vestibule, to your right, you'll see the plaque that was donated by New York artist Scott Teller. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the...
No, that's fine. Welcome. Can I turn this up? There we go. It's a great honor for me to be here today to honor one of our own, Sergeant James Robinson. But one thing before I start moving on, I was in '72, I was a senior in high school. That year they eliminated the draft. So I thought I was going to serve. I was ready to go. I never had the opportunity to serve, but ever since I've been in Westmont, I go out of my way to help all the veterans so that they can continue to be recognized by everyone. And again, the front row here and the gentleman over there, thank you for your World War II service and everybody else. Like so many others, Sergeant Robinson made the ultimate sacrifice while serving our country in Vietnam. He lost his life in battle so that we might live a life of freedom, and we will forever be in his debt. I want to thank the Westmont Post Office, Postmaster Robinson, for their assistance with this ceremony today. Represented Sean Caston and his team for making this dedication possible. It was, even though Peter Roscom started this going, it needed someone to bring it home. And his staff did that, and Representative Caston's been a big supporter of this community of Westmont, and we appreciate all that he's done. And I want to thank Hal Burke and Frank Trout. If it wasn't for those two individuals, we wouldn't be here today. There wouldn't be a plaque at Village Hall. We wouldn't have had a ceremony at the cemetery. Their persistency and their drive to get this done is the reason we're here today. And Hal doesn't let anybody say no. So village staff, everybody's got behind him, and this is a great day for Westmont. A year ago, we placed a plaque in our Village Hall to commemorate the life and service of Sergeant James Robinson. And now, which is very difficult to do, naming a post office after him. May the sacrifice of Sergeant Robinson and all those who lost their lives while serving our nation always be remembered. And again, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Frank Trout has a letter from Senator Duckworth that he would like to read to the audience now. Unfortunately, she's overseas and could not attend the ceremony.
Thank you. Greetings, friends. It is my honor to welcome you to the renaming ceremony for the Westmont Post Office, commemorating Medal of Honor recipient Sergeant James W. Robinson, Jr. This significant tribute is a testament to Sergeant Robinson's contributions and sacrifice on behalf of our great nation. Sergeant Robinson was a Westmont native who answered the call of duty and served in Vietnam. During his time of service, he was courageously defending his unit from danger despite being severely wounded. Sergeant Robinson administered first aid and gave his life to ensure the safety of others. Sergeant Robinson's bravery and selflessness exemplifies the valor and honor of our great nation's service members. Thank you, Congressman Caston, for helping the community by being here today and renaming the Westmont Post Office. Very best to you all on this special occasion. Signed, United States Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is also a veteran who served with distinction. God bless her.
Thank you very much. And to me, this is a moment now where I'm going to turn the podium over to Phil Hall. Phil Hall, 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion. Sorry. We'll tell you the story of his experience with James Robinson in Vietnam. Thank you, Phil. God bless you.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to be here, and thank you, Hal, for inviting me down to do this. First, I'd like to recognize Bill's family and thank them and appreciate you being here. Congressman Caston, thank you. And I did not catch somebody slipped Lieutenant General Rigby, thank you. Mayor Gunther, thank you. And all the veterans here, World War II veterans, and tops, you keep track of me, see if I do all right, okay? One of my fellow soldiers from 1966 and also served in the battle was Ken Mize, sitting out here. Ken, would you raise your hand or stand up? And his wife, Brenda. And also my wife over there that has put up with me for 48 years. And especially Hal Burke and Fred Trout for making this happen. You have stuck through this procedure and spearheaded this effort. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to kind of set the history of what led into this battle. Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry was part of the famed 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Generation before Vietnam, this regiment was the regiment and division that charged bloody Omaha Beach. You World War II veterans, thank you for your service. In Vietnam, the 1st Division and the 2nd Battalion of the 16th Infantry Regiment deployed in July of '65. I would join them in country in right before the first of the year of '66. We were engaged in search and destroy missions looking for organized hardcore Viet Cong units. This one in particular was known as the D-800. These were experienced soldiers. They weren't farmers with pitchforks and crossbows like Apocalypse now alluded to. No one ever threw a spear at me. On April 10th, 1966, my platoon, 2nd Platoon, was a point platoon. In the afternoon, that was Easter Day, we stopped midday when we came to a clearing and set up a defensive perimeter. And Chaplain was flown in with the resupply chopper and held a service, and the helicopter held in place while he held a service and lifted him out. Shortly, when guys were going back to their positions, 3 Viet Cong popped out of the jungle on the far end of the clearing. And amazingly as it sounds, they never spotted us. All the moving around, and a firing line formed rather quickly with a half a dozen people or so, including myself, my Lieutenant John Libbs, and Sergeant Robinson, who you guys may see this picture of Sergeant Robinson and think about 50 years. I look at this picture and think about it was yesterday. Anyway, we downed all 3 of the Viet Cong. One was killed outright. Another one was wounded and incapacitated where he couldn't move, and the third one escaped somehow. and information was gotten from the wounded one that from him before he expired, that yeah, in fact, he was from the D-800 we were looking for. So that evening, we moved our perimeter at last light so that our location wasn't set up for mortaring and possible attack, which didn't happen. So now I'd like to kind of skip to who was James Robinson. James Robinson grew up here. James Robinson was a friend. James Robinson played football here in hometown, and like many of us grew up in the 50s and early 60s, watched our cowboy heroes on TV and probably too much of John Wayne. James went out to Idaho and became a cowboy for one summer? Yep. And then came back and then enlisted with his brother Tom into the Marines and served his hitch in the Marines, and then enlisted in the Army. Those of us who had been in the unit for a while, when you were out in the field, it was pretty much all business. But when we were in the rear and shared a few beers and fun, James was always involved. So that was pretty much James Robinson that I knew. I have a cheat sheet here. On April 11th, the company moved out in standard 3 columns movement. The 3rd platoon was in the lead under Lieutenant Marty Kroll. Midday, they ran into some trails, and we kind of hesitated, stopped in place, and as the lead element was exploring the trails, they came under fire. It wasn't long before the whole company came in under fire, and we formed a defensive perimeter. The perimeter was formed under increasing fire, and so it was more elongated than a perfect circle perimeter. It was more shaped like an almond or a football with 100 or so meters long and only 40 meters wide. At one point, we started receiving mortar fire that walked across the perimeter. I myself, a mortar round went off about 4 feet from me, blew me in the air and knocked me out for a bit, but I didn't, because I was flat on the ground, didn't hit me. The Viet Cong adjusted their kill sack that we had walked into, closing in and bringing the fight very close. Artillery was called in, and the first 3 rounds hit in our perimeter, killing several soldiers and wounding more until they got the artillery adjusted. As the battle developed, the Viet Cong brought up 2 what we'll call 50 caliber machine guns. And in those of you who are unfamiliar with a 50 cal is a ½ inch of lead firing at us. They were raising devastation and hitting guys, and Sergeant Robinson spotted where one of the 50 cals was. Prior to that, he spotted a couple of his squad wounded laying. He charged out firing his M16 and grabbed one at a time, and dragged them back to a safer spot than they were in. Then, out of ammunition, he took 2 grenades from his belt, pulled the pins, and charged the 50 cal. As he charged it, just at the same instant that he released his grenades and threw them, he was hit with a 50 cal and killed instantly. He laid on the field until the next morning when we could get to him. The battle raged into the night, with the perimeter being breached a total of 3 times. The last time, a very badly wounded Sergeant Bosie Gerald threw a tear canister, which backed them out for the final time. They were organizing for a final attack, yelling. Our casualties were so great, there was just 2s and 3s of us still in the fight, and they started yelling back and forth over top of us. And my lieutenant asked National policemen who traveled with us what they were saying. He said, "They get ready for last attack." And artillery was called in and just pounded the area as close as 15 to 20 meters from our positions. The ground shook, trees flew, body parts flew. 1,143 rounds were fired in support of that action, some of it really close. The next day, our B company got to us. Oh, I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about William Pitzenberger, Air Force PJ, who the jungle was so thick and triple canopy jungle, the Army wasn't equipped to come in and pull out wounded. They weren't equipped with winches. There was no place close to land. So the Air Force came out with their pararescue unit. Their mission was really to go out and pick up down pilots. Came out and pulled out some of our wounded. On the second run in, Airman Pitzenberger volunteered to be lowered down and help treat our wounded and help with the evacuation process. On the third run in, their chopper was getting shot up and they needed to leave. They motioned for William Pitzenberger, Bill, to get in the litter basket and be lifted out. He waved them off and made a decision to stay with Charlie Company, people he didn't even know. As Hal said, in October there'll be a movie coming out, and it's basically about the effort to get Bill Pitzenberger's Medal of Honor, which happened in 2000, with some flashbacks to Vietnam. Bill was awarded the Medal of Honor in December of 2000. So after the battles ended in the night, we laid there all night on the alert, watching shadows shift from flares fired from gunships and from helicopters and artillery, with the flares swinging in the breeze and the shadows shifting. A very eerie thing to watch. In the morning, our B company finally got to us, come in and saw the devastation of what was Charlie Company. It took, engineers flew in above us on Chinook helicopters, and in those days there was no such thing as fast roping. They came down and roped ladders, lowered chainsaws and C4, and blew and cut a LZ, which took 2-3 hours before they could get an area big enough to get choppers in to lift out the what remained of Charlie Company. Of the guys in the action, the Army actually does casualties by the whole unit. Cooks, clerks, everybody signed to the unit. They said it was 70% casualties, but in reality there was 134 men on the morning report. 35 of Charlie Company's members were KIA. Some would die later of wounds. There were attached troops that died, medics who were attached, the FO and his radio man were all attached. But the letter that I wrote my dad a few days later, I stated that it was plus or minus 40 people killed there. So here, a couple weeks ago, I asked why this is still important 50 years later. Those of us who survived that day and Vietnam, and everybody that survived that day didn't survive their year in Vietnam, got to come home and have the rest of their life. Sergeant Robinson didn't get to have the rest of his life. He didn't get to have that Mustang convertible. He didn't get to have a family of his own and kids and grandkids. He gave that to us. That was his gift to us that survived, his brothers in arms. And it goes on, why he's not forgotten with the actions of what you're doing here today. I thank you for having Sergeant Robinson remembered and not forgotten. I don't forget Sergeant Robinson for one day in my life. So with that, I'll conclude my comments here with wishing Sergeant Robinson a happy birthday, and he is not forgotten. Thank you.
God bless you. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's my honor now to present United States Army Lieutenant General Randall Higbee, retired. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll take these and I'll blow off.
Yeah, I won't need that. So I guess I'm batting cleanup for the guest speakers today, so I'll try to hit a home run here. It's good to see the members of the Robinson family that came out today. Thank you to Congressman Caston and Mayor Gunther, and to our veterans in the audience today. It's good to see you out here, particularly from America's greatest generation. We've got the Navy, the Marines, and the Army represented here out of World War II, and that's all we had. We didn't have an Air Force in those days. So welcome. It's good to see you. First responders, I see a bunch of you guys back there. Thanks for your service too. And thank you for the invitation to come say a few words, and I will keep it a few words, about a great American hero. When you move to Washington, D.C. for the first time, you've got a big problem. And the problem is finding a place to live, right, Congressman? Finding a place to live that you can afford, that's within some distance of, close distance of where you work. And that's the problem I had when I first went there in 1988. So I consulted with a few friends of mine, and they recommended this particular realtor who knew the area well. And so we talked to her on the phone, and she recommended an area called Fairfax. And so she was describing it because I had a daughter in junior high that would be going into high school. And she said, "You'll like Fairfax. It's got a great high school there, Robinson High School." So I checked it out, and Robinson High School was named after this gentleman, James W. Robinson, Jr. It was built in 1971. And if you want to see his Medal of Honor, you need to go to Robinson High School in Fairfax, Virginia, because that's the family presented his Medal of Honor to that high school. And today, and the reason why I left this out, the reason why the high school was named after him, he was the first resident of Virginia that was awarded the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War. And there's a lot of military that live in the Washington area. And so today in this area in Illinois, you too have awarded a distinction to one of your sons that came from this area, who distinguished himself on a very distant battlefield. Over 3,400,000 Americans served in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, that 10-year period between 1962 and 1972, 1973. And during that time, there were 261 so far Medals of Honor awarded to military personnel. That means only one Medal of Honor was awarded for every 13,000 soldiers that went there. Over half of all the Medal of Honor recipients in Vietnam were killed in action, and the medals were awarded posthumously to their families. You often hear phrases like, "they gave their lives." That sounds good. That sounds very noble, very romantic. But my veterans are here who's been there, they'll tell you that's not really what happens. You see, the services don't train our soldiers and sailors, airmen, and Marines to give their lives. They're trained to take lives. They're trained to take lives of the enemy, and when they die in combat, those lives are taken from them. Shake your head like this, because that's what really happens out there. Sergeant Robinson was fighting for his life, and he was fighting for the lives of his fire team. He was their leader in combat. It was his job to do that, and he fell while he was trying to perform that job. Mary Sheehy, Sergeant Sheehy as I call her, she's back over here, on Congressman Caston's staff, asked me if I'd make a few comments about how to properly honor those veterans that served in the Vietnam War. That's a very thoughtful question. As you may know, and as many of you know, as the Vietnam War on and the casualties grew, many Americans turned against that war, and protests were mounted all across the country. At that time, the U.S. had a policy of individual replacements instead of units being replaced, so when a soldier came home, he came home alone, not with the unit he served in. Unlike today, where battalions, brigades, and even divisions return home with the warmly deserved welcome that they receive. After 1968, Returning soldiers from the Vietnam War were cautioned not to wear their uniform in public because the anti-war feelings in this country included even protesting each individual soldier. And in fact, it was not until after 9/11 in 2001 that I ever heard the phrase, "Thank you for your service." Now, I've been told that many times since then, and I appreciate it. But in answer to Mary's question, I would suggest that you might add to the Vietnam vets, welcome home. And so to my fellow Vietnam vets, welcome home. Years ago, I was invited to the Remembrance Day ceremony at the chapel at Sandhurst in England. Now, Sandhurst is the British equivalent of our West Point. The chapel is very large, and it's very tall because all the chapels in Europe, as you know, are tall. And up at the top, it's very bright, and there's stained glass windows, and it pictures all the field marshals that served in the British Army throughout their history. But as you come down into the chapel, down below, it's pretty dark. And on the walls in that dark chapel are small plaques, and there are hundreds of them. And they are there to honor all the graduates of Sandhurst who've been killed in the history of Sandhurst. Those veterans, those soldiers whose lives were taken in combat. The service ends with one of the plaques being removed and read to the audience, honoring not only him, but all the other British dead in all their wars. So if you were to read one of those British plaques, it would read something like this. Second Lieutenant Robert L. Hall, 2nd Ulster Regiment, 30th Division, 4th British Corps, Battle of the Somme, died 1 July 1916. He was 20. He is 20. He'll always be 20. In the Pentagon, there's a hallway called the Hall of Heroes with the plaques with the names of all the Medal of Honor winners since World War II. So for us this day, if we were to take Sergeant Robinson's plaque down, it would read, Sergeant James W. Robinson, Jr., Company C, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division, United States Army, Republic of Vietnam, died 11 April 1966, Medal of Honor. He was 26, he is 26, and he'll always be 26.
Thank you. At this time, I believe it would be very appropriate for all of us to have a moment of silence for all of our fallen heroes.
Would you all please stand?
If I may now, I would like to have the unveiling of the plaque. And will Fred please step up to the plaque? And Frank, as commander of the Westmont American Legion, will you please participate in the unveiling of the plaque? Phil, you as well. Ken, if you'd like to join the group. Ken Mize, please, who's there. All right. Here's the microphone here. We're going to have
Haley Grimm.
Haley
Grimm.
Grimm. Haley Grimm's going to sing for us, God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Would you like to say a few words about the plaque that will be in the lobby? And
This is a replica of the plaque that has been placed in the Westmont Post Office lobby. You all are welcome to come inside and see as we unveil the plaque that has been posted as well. Feel free to take pictures. And again, thank you guys for coming out today for this ceremony.
thank you, Fred. That was good until I did that. For closing remarks, I just want to thank everyone that made the journey here. And it's very gratifying to see that Sergeant James Robinson was not forgotten. And I say that we also pay tribute over this holiday weekend, maybe find a couple of moments of silence in gratitude for all of our men and women serving in the armed forces and away from home, and to their families who also make great sacrifices in support of our military. With that, this ends our ceremony, and I want to thank everyone for coming out and thank God for the beautiful weather. Have a wonderful holiday weekend.